Speaker. Good morning. Look, in essence, I will support the government's bill, and I'll go further. I'll applaud the government for acting on this. It is self-evident that people should not be allowed to gamble with money they don't have. So this is a very positive step forward. I am sure it is evidence-based, and I'm confident that it will diminish the incidence of gambling addiction in this country. So good on the government. And it's so important to be introducing reforms such as these, Deputy Speaker. You know, the Australian Institute of Family Studies reports that 46% of Australians who gamble are at low through medium to high risk of gambling addiction. I'll say that again because that figure is just a breathtaking figure. The Australian Institute of Family Studies finds that 46% of gamblers are at risk of gambling addiction. And very relevant to today's bill, Deputy Speaker, the Institute also finds that online problem gambling is 3 times prevalent now than what I'll call terrestrial gambling, like poker machines, horses, keno, lotteries and so on. This is the big problem and challenge for us for the future, to rein in gambling addiction among those who are going online. Among those, frankly, who have a gambling device. I've got one here. I've got a gambling device sitting on the table in front of me. I suspect you, Deputy Speaker, have got a gambling device sitting on your table. Everyone in this chamber probably has a gambling device in their pocket or in their hand or in their bag. So we've got to do something, and I think this bill goes, actually, I think, some considerable way to reining in gambling addiction. Deputy Speaker, the scale of what we're dealing with must not be underestimated. Australians lose something like $25 billion a year gambling. That's billion, not millions. That's $25,000 million a year. Now, sure, a lot of that money is lost by people that can afford it, and that's fine. I'm not anti-gambling. I'm actually pro-harm minimisation. I'll buy a lottery ticket. I'll join in a sweepstake on Melbourne Cup Day. There's nothing wrong with people who can afford to lose a little bit of money, to have a bit of fun and to lose that money. The problem is, though, when people are losing more than they can afford. And the number of people with a gambling addiction in this country is measured in the tens of thousands. In a country as small as ours. And every one of those gambling addicts is a human tragedy. We spend a lot of time, I've already referred to figures like 46%, I've referred to learned bodies like the Institute of Family Studies, referred to $25 billion. All these facts and figures and reports, they make it a bit abstract, actually. You need to remember, Deputy Speaker, we all need to remember, Deputy Speaker, that every gambling addict is a human tragedy. Every gambling addict is a mum or a dad or a brother or a sister or a son or a daughter or a friend or a work colleague or someone we pass walking down the street. There might even be someone in this room, for all we know, who is battling with a gambling addiction. And those people are often losing their jobs, they're often losing their relationships and their family, they're losing their house, their health, and sometimes, sadly, Deputy Speaker, they're losing their life. Now, it's very hard to get an accurate figure of the number of people who suicide each year on account of their gambling addiction, but good research points to something north of 400 people a year. In other words, more than one person a day in this country takes their life, suicides, on account of their gambling addiction. I mean, this is a human tragedy. This is exactly the sort of thing that this parliament should be dealing with. This is exactly the sort of bill that this parliament should be dealing with. I lament the fact that in the 13 years I've been in parliament, it has taken a long time to get traction with the issue of gambling reform. But we are finally getting traction. And that gives me great comfort, and I think it gives the community great comfort that we are now starting to focus on this. This is good. I mean, I suspect every member and senator could come into the House of Representatives or the Senate and recount the stories that they have heard from their own constituents. I'm still to this day affected by one constituent A woman, I think in her 30s, a couple of young children, just sort of so high, who had been, unbeknown to her partner, taking the housekeeping money, the money for the power bill, and had been blowing the lot on gambling. And unbeknown to her partner, had been dealing with Aurora in Tasmania repeatedly with trying to keep the power on. And Aurora, to their credit, had put together a repayment plan after a repayment plan after a repayment plan. And ultimately, Aurora said they could do no more. Ultimately, one of the not-for-profit organisations who was trying to help this unfortunate soul said they can't just keep giving that person money because that person was losing it gambling. And the power was cut off. So here we had a young family in a Hobart winter with no power for the stove, no power for the heating, no power for the hot water, not even power for the lights. I just hope that family were able to pick themselves up from rock bottom and get on with their life. But, that's not an unusual story, Deputy Speaker. I make the point again, I think many people, probably most members and senators, have heard stories. So it is quite unfathomable to my mind that it has taken so long to get traction in this House. But we are getting traction, and this reform actually complements other reforms. The previous Speaker, the member for Dunkley, was talking about BetStop. Now, I think that's a fabulous reform. That will allow voluntary online self-exclusion. It's across the whole country for online gamblers, minimum of 3 months up to a lifetime, free of charge. And that's a really good reform, because even a gambling addict in their lucid moments will make sensible decisions. People don't get their pension check and go down to the local pub, local pokies venue with the intention of losing their whole pension. They get their pension and think, this fortnight it's different. This fortnight I'm not gonna buckle to my gambling addiction, or I'm not gonna pull out my gambling device and blow the lot today. Today is different. In those lucid moments they make sensible decisions. And if you have something like BetStop, which we now have rolling out, in those lucid moments they will set sensible limits on BetStop. BetStop will reduce gambling addiction, just like the government's bill to ban the use of credit cards will reduce gambling addiction. And that will save lives. That will save families like the one I referred to, Deputy Speaker, in Hobart. I'm also pleased to say that the industry has sought to improve their messaging with their advertising. Now, it's only a small step, a very small step, but you know what? All those little small steps add up. And I think that's a positive thing. In the poker machine sphere, we've had some really significant developments in recent years, Deputy Speaker, and you from Tasmania would be well aware that Tasmania is the first jurisdiction to roll out a cashless mandatory poker machine pre-commitment card. That everyone in Tasmania soon will need to get a hold of a card and will need to use that card. They'll load up the card with cash in some way, but when they play on the poker machines, they'll put the card in, there'll be no cash at the machine, and that card will monitor their use of poker machines and their losses, and it will enforce limits on that poker machine player. So in Tasmania, poker machine players will be limited to $100 a day, $500 a month and $5,000 a year. And although the players will be able to vary the daily and monthly limit, if they want to vary the annual $5,000 limit, they will have to make the case to a government body that they can afford to lose more than $5,000. So that is a tremendous turn of events. It is nation-leading, and I applaud the current Tasmanian state government for that. I also note that in Victoria there's recently been announcements that they will introduce mandatory carded play with a maximum $100 load up at any one time and trading hour restrictions as well. It's a little more, it's unclear what the timeline is in Victoria for these changes. In Tasmania it's more clear. They've talked about as soon as by the end of next year having the cashless card in Tasmania. So, we are heading in the right direction, as we should. I know we're talking about online gambling, but I am taking this opportunity to talk about poker machines because of those really positive developments, particularly in Tasmania in recent times, and the fact that this move towards cashless and card-based play is actually entirely consistent with the New South Wales Crime Commission's report from October last year, where they found that in New South Wales, literally billions of dollars of what they call dirty money is going through New South Wales poker machines, and it is well and truly opened up the possibility of gambling in that space, in that jurisdiction, with those devices being used for money laundering. But, Deputy Speaker, there's still much to do. I would ask the government to consider improving their bill. I note that the bill is deficient because it doesn't apply to all forms of gambling. It really only applies to online and sports betting. But that still leaves unaddressed the use of credit for things like lotteries and Keno. Now, I know these other forms of gambling have a much lower rate of gambling addiction, but still it is people gambling with money they don't have, and it is still creating some gambling addicts with these other forms of gambling. So I would hope the government would consider expanding the scope of the bill to go beyond just online and sports betting. I also note that the bill doesn't apply to all forms of credit. For example, the bill will still allow someone to use their debit card with an online gambling company, but that debit card could be linked, for example, to a line of credit or perhaps a redraw on their home loan. So I think I know there is opportunity for the government to tighten this bill up further to make sure that all ways in which a gambler might access credit are in fact reined in, not just with the obvious use of a credit card as such. And the member for Dunkley also, I'm pleased she was the speaker just before me and she referred to gambling advertising. That's an area where the government really needs to act, and the government really needs to have a very strong and effective response, in fact, to the member for Dunkley's committee, because she's the chair of the Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs, and they've made some very strong recommendations about gambling advertising. And I think that's the next big thing for this government to address. Frankly, the community has, I don't know if this is an unparliamentary word, but has had a gutful of gambling advertising. We're all sick of trying to watch the footy and being bombarded with ads, maybe not during the game, but certainly either side of the game. It's ruining our enjoyment of particularly sporting events. It's also very harmful for children. Bizarrely, gambling advertising is banned during G-rated TV times, Deputy Speaker, but there's a carve-out, there's an exemption that it's allowed during, around sporting events. So there you have on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, when children are watching their heroes, and associated with their heroes are gambling advertising. This has got to be influencing children. So we've got to ban gambling advertising. It's as simple as that. I note that the Australian Communications and Media Authority did some research, and they found in one recent year there was over 1 million gambling ads aired on Australian free-to-air TV and radio. Oh, that's an unfathomable figure. 1 million TV ads on free-to-air TV and radio around Australia in just 1 year. That's got to be having an influence, particularly on our young people, particularly on that 46% of Australians who gamble who are judged by the Institute of Family Studies to be at risk of problem gambling. And, Deputy Speaker, of course, there's also the other reform that would be easily made. In fact, industry insiders tell me it is technically easy and cheap for Australian online gambling providers to be linked in real time, so that when you hit your daily limit with one company, you don't just swipe to the next company and run up your daily limit a second time. There is no good reason why these apps can't be linked. So I'll wind it up there, Deputy Speaker. I am heartened by this progress. I applaud the government for this bill. I will support the bill. And I'll take this opportunity to congratulate the countless advocates for reform in this country who for years have just battled away. Well, they're starting to see dividends, and I hope they get comfort from that. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.